Okay, so in previous topic we discussed about the aeration, and before that we discussed about the screening. Okay, so basically the screen are the two types, the fine screen and the coarse screen. Okay, also the medium screen are used for the removal of the floating solid. So different types of screen and the uses of the screen and how to dispose that screening material that we already discussed. In previous topic we discussed about the aeration. The principle of aeration, then what is the purpose of aeration, what are the advantages of aeration, and then what are the limitations of aeration, and what are the different methods of the aeration. So in that we discuss what is the basic principle of aeration. So gas transfer, it is nothing but the basic principle of aeration, and the purpose of aeration is nothing but to remove the odor and bad gases from the water, remove CO2 and H2S, also to kill some of the bacteria, and also to oxidize FeNMG. So these are the various purpose of the aeration, and one of the major, that is to increase the oxygen content of that water. These are the various purposes of the aeration process or aeration method. Okay. So basic idea about aeration, it is nothing but expose that water with the atmosphere so that the atmospheric oxygen come in contact with that water, and which increase the capacity of oxygen into that water and release the CO2 like carbon dioxide and other gases from the water. So this about the aeration, and in that we discuss the different methods of aeration. In that we discuss the step aeration. In steps aeration, it also you can say the cascade aeration, where 3 to 4 steps are used and water is allowed freely follow over that steps, so that water come in contact with air and which release gases and increase the oxygen content. Okay. Second method, in that the spray nozzle, where the nozzles are used and water is sprayed into the atmosphere, into the air, so that same process happen. Okay. And the one of the method is the sprinkling method, where you can sprinkle the water, and another method, it is you can say diffuse aeration method. So diffuse aeration method, in that method the aerator are fitted at the bottom of the tank, and compressed air is supplied from the bottom of the tank, so that increase the oxygen content into that water. So, and the final method, that is a filter method. In that filter with different material, you can say coke, slag. So this different material you can use for that process. So these various different methods which are used for the aeration process. So in that you can remove the CO2 and H2S gases, and you can increase the oxygen content of that water. So after that, the next stage or next important process, that is called as sedimentation. Okay. So sedimentation, as is indicate its name, sedimentation, it is nothing but the process of the removal of the sediment. Okay. Sediment, it is nothing but the suspended solid or suspended matter. Okay. So whatever that solid in the form of suspension which present into that water, that going to be removed by the process, and that process is called as sedimentation. Okay. So sedimentation, it is a process of removal of sediment from that water. Okay. So in the first process, that is water screening, where we remove the larger floating solid, but after the removal of this larger floating solid, some of the suspended material, either you can say large size, or either you can say medium or small size, they are always present into that water, and it is important to remove that water, that sediment from that water before the treatment of water. So this process, sedimentation process, where we can remove the fine and small and medium particle size or sediment from that process of sedimentation. Okay. So this is the process of sedimentation, and what is the principle of sedimentation, that we discuss in the next. So this process, sedimentation process, basically of two types. The first type is called as plain sedimentation process, and second type is called as sedimentation with coagulation. Okay. So what is the idea about the plain sedimentation, and what is the idea about sedimentation with coagulation? Okay. So just basic difference between these both, sedimentation and coagulation. So sedimentation, it is a simply process where without coagulant or without any chemical, which this that means no any addition of extra chemical or extra whatever other coagulants. Okay, so this just a simply process where water is allowed to settle down through by gravity through the gravity, and so that the whatever the suspended solid that going to be settled down at the bottom. Okay, so no any addition of extra chemical. So second stage in that case is, you can say, the sedimentation and coagulation, where we add chemical and sediment so that the suspended impurities that comes together and they create a larger and sizable flock. So that process is called as coagulation and flocculation. So basically these two types of process uh, that is of the sedimentation process. The first, you can say, sedimentation 1, that is called as plain sedimentation or sedimentation without coagulation, and type 2 sedimentation 2, or either you can say settling 2 type, that is called as coagulation flocculation. Okay, so this is the basic idea about the sedimentation, where water is allowed to settle down, or the particle are allowed to settle down by the gravity. Okay, so what is sedimentation? Sedimentation is a water treatment process during which water has little or no movement and the suspended solid sink to the bottom under the force of gravity and from a sediment. This process called as sedimentation. Okay, so as the name indicates, sedimentation, it is a process of removal of the sediment, or to allow that sediment settle down at the bottom under the force of gravity. So that is what the process. Sedimentation is a water treatment process where the suspended solid allowed to settle down at the bottom of the tank by the force of gravity. In this process of sedimentation, the inorganic impurities are removed and the water is kept ready for the further process before it is used for the drinking. Okay. So after removal of these impurities by the sedimentation process, this water is kept ready for the further process, like you can say sedimentation with coagulation, or either you can say the filtration, or either chlorination, disinfection. Okay, whatever the other different methods. Okay, and finally it is used for the drinking purpose. Okay, so the sedimentation tanks are designed for giving the total rest or partial rest to the flowing water. Okay, so this process, sedimentation process, that carried out in a tank, and that tanks is called a sedimentation tank. Okay, so the tanks which are used for the removal of sediments and which are used for the process of sedimentation, that tanks are called as sedimentation tanks. Generally these tanks, sedimentation tanks, are either circular or rectangular. Basically the circular is most preferred for the removal of solid, or either you can say the sedimentation process. So basically this circular tank are mostly used for the sedimentation process. Next, as the water is allowed to settle down, the heavy inorganic material settle down to the bed of the tank, and remaining lighter impurities are removed from the top of the tank. Okay, so whatever that lighter impurities that you can remove from the outlet at the top, and whatever that suspended impurities which settle down at the bed of the tank, that you can remove from the bottom of the tank. Okay, so this in this manner you can remove the suspended solid from that water. Okay, so in this process, sedimentation process, it remove about 60% of suspended solid and 75% of bacterial impurities. So almost the 50% load of that water is going to be removed in the plain sedimentation process. Okay, so almost 60% of solid and 75% of bacteria that remove in this process of sedimentation. Okay, so what is the purpose of sedimentation? Okay, so why we are going to use the sedimentation? So the first, to remove the coarse dispersed phase. Next, to remove coagulated and flocculated impurities. To remove precipitated impurities after chemical treatment, and to settle the sludge biomass after activated sludge process or trickling filter. So these are the various advantages and uses of sedimentation process. Okay, so the first thing, to remove the coarse dispersed phase, so whatever that coarse solid that we can remove by sedimentation process. Secondly, coagulation flocculation. So after the addition of chemical or coagulation and flocculation process, you have to remove that flock. So for that purpose we require the sedimentation process. Next, to remove the precipitated impurities after the chemical treatment. Okay. So after the addition of chemical like alum, lime and other chemicals after addition, So whatever that precipitate form, that precipitate you can remove by the sedimentation process. Next, to settle the sludge biomass after the activated sludge process and the trickling filter. So this process, you can say the activated sludge process and the trickling filter, this process which are generally used for the oxidation of organic matter in case of the wastewater and sewage. Okay, so sewage, it is nothing but the wastewater which generated from the houses. Okay, and that sewage and that wastewater that going to be treated by the method of activated sludge process, or also you can say the trickling filter. Okay, so during this process, activated sludge process or trickling filter, this all waste, organic waste, is oxidized by aerobic bacteria, and in this process whatever that sludge produce, that sludge you can remove in sedimentation tank, sedimentation basin. So for that, for the removal of that biomass, for the removal of that sludge, we require the sedimentation basin, sedimentation tank. Okay, so next to activated sludge process and next to trickling filter, we required the sedimentation tank. Okay, so these are the various purpose of the sedimentation. Okay, so what is the principle of sedimentation? Okay, so basically the principle of sedimentation process is the suspended solid present in water having specific gravity greater than that of water and tend to settle down by gravity as soon as turbulence is retarded by offering storage.